What's up, everybody? We're back with another fantasy football video. Today's video, we're going to be talking about preparation for week 3, waiver wire candidates, buy low candidates, sell high candidates, and talk about some guys I would consider dropping as well. So we're now into having 2 weeks of sample size, so I'm going to talk about some of my decisions that I would make as a fantasy owner to help you be successful in fantasy football. If you're interested in more content like this, please consider checking out my channel. I make a wide variety of fantasy football videos, as well as some other content as well if you're interested in that. So real quick, before we go into buy low, sell high, etc., we will talk about my projections last week and how things have turned out so far. So buy lows last week, some of the names I mentioned: Aaron Rodgers still playing tonight, Justin Herbert. Gonna mention him again. You get my gist there. I also said to buy low on Aaron Jones. That's done well so far for Monday Night Football. Antonio Gibson still work in progress. Najee Harris proved. Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs got a touchdown. Allen Robinson a little disappointing. Darnell Mooney kind of coming up as well. George Kittle, I said, is buy low tight end. I'm gonna mention him again too. Tampa Bay, if you bought low on them, that worked out very well for you. Cleveland and Denver also played well as well. Sell high. So Jalen Hurts, I said, sell high quarterback. He struggled a little bit. Melvin Gordon didn't put up the same numbers he did either, so that was a good sell high candidate. And Mark Ingram as well, a guy that you could have picked up, but again, a player that I wasn't particularly high on. Amari Cooper, I said to sell high on. I've been saying that, and sure enough, he was inconsistent yet again. So Antonio Brown, I said to sell high on. He also flopped in week 2. Rob Gronkowski, I'm going to take the L for that. But again, I am confident that he is not going to continue to replicate multiple touchdown games all season. So just, yeah. But anyway, my point is that some of these takes I've had that I will say I was successful in, other ones I've not. You have your up and downs from time to time. But some of the trends that I've been talking about for some of these players have translated into week 2. So I'm going to hopefully encourage you to stay patient with some of these players that I might mention that didn't necessarily go off for you, got a long season. But yeah, we'll get into week 3. So my buy low quarterback, I'm going to start with the buy lows and then go through every single position, kind of like I did in last week's video. If you want to, you can check that out. But my buy low quarterback for this week is Josh Allen. And I bring up Josh Allen's name because he started off the season a little rough. He's only put up a total of 17.2 fantasy points in week 1 and then about 16.7 in week 2. So not the kind of groundbreaking numbers that you're expecting from a guy who many thought would be an MVP candidate. Against Miami, he only threw for 179 yards, 2 touchdowns, interception. But I'm confident that he will turn this around. The next couple weeks, he's got Washington, which is a defense that has not performed up to expectations so far this season. Houston, which is a very beatable defense. And then the next 2 weeks, he's got Kansas City, which is going to be a shootout. Going to be a lot of opportunity for him there, as well as Tennessee, which has been one of the worst pass defenses so far in the NFL. So just those 4 games coming up, I expect to bounce back for Josh Allen. I would definitely try to buy low on him if he is available. Justin Herbert, I mentioned earlier. Another guy who started off a little poor this season. Hasn't been terrible, but he also hasn't done as well as projected. He only scored a little less than 15 points against the Cowboys. But again, another player that I think that the offensive firepower is there. He's got to cut down on some of his turnovers and make better decisions, but I am confident that will happen as the season goes along. I try to buy low on him while he's relatively affordable, in my opinion. And then another guy that I would consider buying low on as well, a little less owned, but Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill has not played particularly well so far, but he does have, again, the offensive weapons: Julio Jones, A.J. Brown. But he didn't pass for a touchdown last week. I do think that will change. Just looking at Ryan Tannehill's schedule the next couple weeks as well, he's got Indianapolis, which is a beatable secondary. Then he's got some great matchups against the New York Jets and the Jacksonville Jaguars the next 2 weeks, which is going to be a lot of potential for points. And then Buffalo and Kansas City the following 2 weeks, which is going to be shootouts. A lot of opportunity for him there too. So again, another bounce back candidate I like. We move to running backs now. Saquon Barkley, I still like as a buy low. So, and I think that this is a good opportunity to try to buy him going into this week 3 where you could reap some value with having Atlanta on the schedule. They're not a very good defense. They just got obliterated by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Saquon Barkley has a lot of risk associated with him, and he has a lot of questions that people are very shaky on him with. But this is a good opportunity to try to buy him while he hasn't put up a great game so far, because this is probably one of the cheapest times you can get him, and he's got the upside of a top 5 running back. Definitely try to buy low on him. Another guy that I should try to buy low on as well, and I mentioned this in my video yesterday for takeaways, is Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon has almost no competition for touches. In week 2, he was the only Bengal that carried the football. He's an every down back. He's got some pass catching capabilities, and the Bengals have a lighter defense than expected against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is banged up a little bit. I think Cincinnati might have a little more success in this game than they did against the Chicago Bears. I expect Joe Mixon will have bounce back games as the season goes along. Try to buy low on him. And then I bring up Alvin Kamara as well, because anytime you get somebody like that coming off a 7-point game, you got to throw out your offers and see what you can get, because he's a top 5 running back caliber as well. Same kind of concept with David Montgomery too. I think he's another good buy low candidate. Looked very good. He just hasn't. He's gone up against some tough matchup situations, for lack of better words. And I think that he will have better games as the season goes along once Justin Fields gets a little more familiar with the offense. That will kind of open up the playbook for him, because he's not going to be just the guy they zone in on. But another guy to consider buying low on as well, who I think is not really going to be talked about by a lot of people, is Michael Carter. Michael Carter was a fantasy darling rookie for the Jets at the beginning of the season, but then didn't have a clear path to start. Week 1 going into week 2, people assumed that it was going to be shifting from Tevin Coleman to Ty Johnson, but based on the performance against New England, Carter was actually the most efficient of the running backs. And of all the guys, Tevin Coleman, Ty Johnson, and Michael Carter, it would make sense for the Jets to try to give Carter more opportunity to see what he can do. So I suspect as the season goes along, Michael Carter will have better matchups, and he will get involved more often. It's going to take some time, and you got to be patient, but I would consider trying to buy low on him while the Jets have looked terrible, because if you got space to stash him, he might return some good value for you later on. Wide receivers to buy low on. So I would buy low on A.J. Brown. We take a look at the game against Seattle. A lot of people are thinking that A.J. Brown would have been the guy to break out and have an excellent game, but it was actually Julio Jones that played a lot better. All that being said, A.J. Brown actually had more targets than Julio Jones. A.J. Brown, in week 2, he had 9 targets compared to Julio's 8. It only translated into 3 catches. And in week 1, he only had 4 catches for a touchdown. But again, they've got some great matchups over the next few weeks, so they're going to rely on him heavily, especially in those shootout games against Kansas City and Buffalo. I think A.J. Brown, this is a good time to try to buy low on him while he hasn't really broken out yet, because you got to take your chances on guys like that while they're still relatively haven't really shown their owners a lot. And if they're naive, they might give him up to you. Similar situation, DK Metcalf. So Tyler Lockett has dominated the Seattle pass offense, and I'm going to talk about him in a sec as well. But DK Metcalf is somebody that you definitely want to try to buy low on. He's a guy that's also highly drafted, has not really performed particularly well so far this season. It hasn't been bad. He's 16 points first game, 11 points the second game, but he is getting a lot of targets, especially in week 2. He had 11 targets. So the opportunities are going to come for him, but you do have to maybe temper expectations compared to where he was going in some drafts as late first round pick. But I didn't really think he kind of was in that range anyway. But again, this is the guy after 2 weeks of mediocre play, buy low on him. Another guy like that, Kenny Golladay, drafted relatively high, but going up against Atlanta this week, very bad pass defense. And he's also got more involved in the offense. He did have, I believe, 8 targets against Washington. He kind of had a couple drops that weren't exactly great. But again, low point total, got a lot of opportunity against Atlanta. And he's involved in this offense. I think he will bounce back this week. T. Higgins, another good buy low candidate, very involved in the Bengals offense. Seems to be the most consistent of the receiving options they have. And then another guy I'd throw out there is Robert Woods. Cooper Kupp is dominating the offense, and I love Cooper Kupp for the season. But Robert Woods is going to have his opportunities as well as the season goes along, especially with their running back injuries. Expect them to throw it in the slot more often. Tight ends to buy low on. So I really like Austin Hooper as a buy low tight end. He is a guy that the Browns' pass offense, as I talked about yesterday, is very beat up. Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham might miss time. And the way Cleveland's offense is that they're going to get their tight ends involved. Austin Hooper is the best of them. I think he could absorb a lot of those targets that Landry and Odell Beckham would have usually provided because their receiving core isn't really stepping up otherwise. Really like Austin Hooper as a good buy low candidate. And then George Kittle, I mentioned last week. Be patient with his performance too. I know it hasn't been great, but again, another team that is dealing with injuries in their backfield, and I think that they're going to have more opportunities in the short game for George Kittle to rack up some PPR points. Very favored target of Jimmy Garoppolo as well, so I think his role will increase. Try to buy low on him. And try to, honestly, I'm going to talk about Gronk in a bit, but if you could, I'm going to continue to advocate, if you could trade Gronk for Kittle, I would still do that, even with how Gronk is playing compared to Kittle, because it's just a better long-term investment in my opinion. Tyler Higbee, another one like that to a degree, but I'm a little more cautious with him because he's relatively on the fringe anyway, but this is a good time to buy low after a poor week 2. Defenses. So Baltimore, I think great matchup coming up against Detroit. In week 3, they have a chance to bounce back after a tough matchup against Kansas City's offense. And then Cleveland, again, Cleveland is facing Justin Fields, which has kind of struggled a little bit with ball security in week 2. So good opportunity for the Browns to capitalize on a rookie quarterback. Sell high candidates, guys that I would recommend trying to trade away. And bear with me on this. It's going to sound crazy, but I would sell high on Tom Brady. I'm not doubting Tom Brady's value. I think Tom Brady is a great quarterback to have. But the performance that he's put up over the last 2 games is not going to be replicated, in my opinion. You look at his matchups over the next few weeks. He's got the Rams, he's got the Patriots, he's got Miami. And then later on this season, he's got Chicago and New Orleans in that top half of the schedule. So there's going to be more difficult defenses than Dallas, which is a notoriously bad defense, and Atlanta, which is also a notoriously bad defense. Tom Brady, he's probably still going to give you some good starting value that I would still probably start him if you have him. But if you could flip him for somebody like Josh Allen, I would definitely do that. I would flip him for I'm trying to think of some other examples off the top of my head that are realistic. But Aaron Rodgers, I would consider that as well. Maybe not as much, but younger guys like that have some rushing value. So maybe like an example, Lamar Jackson before he went off in Sunday night's game. Let's say he had those 2 interceptions. They didn't come back and they lost. And then I would try to target him as an example. So good. Tom Brady is not a bad player to own, but I would try to sell high on him. Other guys like this as well, Derek Carr. Derek Carr is a fringe starter anyway, and part of being a good savvy fantasy owner is that you pick up guys on waivers, you get them at high value, and then you trade them for guys that were drafted higher, because they're going to generally, players that are drafted higher they've been there for a reason, and they're guys that have been successful and will be more reliable than somebody that you could have picked up on waivers. So Derek Carr is a good opportunity to try to capitalize on something like that, or a quarterback who is probably drafted higher than him who may be struggling right now. Or for a flex even, I would definitely do that. Running backs to sell high on. To me, the number 1 is Cordarelle Patterson. Top 10 running back right now. A lot of this is because Atlanta is coming from behind and they really do not have a good running back backfield anyway. They're probably arguably one of the worst running back cores in the league. But Cordarelle Patterson, again, a good player to own, but you can try to flip him for some better players, I think. I don't think anybody would do this, but if you could somehow convince somebody that you'll give them Cordarelle Patterson and a receiver, and then you'll take Saquon Barkley. You should definitely do that. Cordarelle Patterson, not drafted. He's a converted receiver. I know he's good for PPR and he'll be a good floor player, but this is just not replicable throughout the whole season to expect he'll be a top 10 running back. So, yeah. Another similar player, Tony Pollard, went off for the Cowboys. Great player to own if you have Zeke, but I think as a standalone value, I would personally recommend not trying to hold Pollard if you can and try to see if you can trade him away. A lot of people have a high opinion of Pollard after this game and just Zeke's questions in general. Zach Moss, sell high. I talked about him in my Monday video, so I won't talk on him too much. But 2 touchdowns on 8 carries. He didn't play week 1 because of a healthy scratch. What are they going to do throughout the season? Because Devin Singletary still had more carries. Josh Allen is a threat to run the ball. Try to sell Zach Moss here while you can because he's a guy that's generally been up and down. Try to sell him at his high points. And then another guy to sell high, J.D. McKissic. Great game, and I think another good player to have, but part of being savvy, take advantage of these games where J.D. McKissic has 20 points in a PPR setting and try to flip him for a more consistent player that will be more reliable. So a good example, Myles Gaskin, who's got a more clear path to being a number 1 starter in Miami. I would trade McKissic for Gaskin. Wide receivers. Again, bear with me. Number 2 wide receiver in fantasy football this year, but I would try to sell high for Tyler Lockett. And I would only do this if you're getting an elite receiver, like a DeAndre Hopkins, a Devontae Adams, a Tyreek Hill coming off a 5-point game. Those are guys I would try to target with Tyler Lockett, and if I could pull that off, I would definitely do it. But if you can't get guys like that, it's not a bad consolation prize to just hold Tyler Lockett. Guys that I would definitely try to sell and see if you can unload him in some capacity, Henry Ruggs. Had a good game this week, but again, a guy very much like Amari Cooper, another former Raider. He's totally dependent on big plays. He had a 61-yard touchdown as part of his 113 yards. He also had another 30-yard reception, but at halftime he only had 15 yards receiving. And that's a lot of what you see with Henry Ruggs throughout the whole game. Try to flip this guy for some value now while you can. Rondale Moore, another one like that. Rondale Moore he's going to have some opportunities with Arizona, but I think Arizona is kind of turning into a little bit of what the Chiefs are to a degree, where they're going to have guys that they've got. Hopkins is a guy you can just lock and load every week, like Travis Kelce. But then you're going to have up and down performances from the McCole Hardmans, the DeMarcus Robinsons, etc. Very much I see this like with the Cardinals. We saw this with Christian Kirk. He went off week 1, but struggled week 2. Rondale Moore, I see a similar pattern. And then OBJ. So I don't really know how. I know OBJ's value is not particularly high right now, but you could try to, again, his value might be going up a little bit now with Jarvis Landry's injury. There are probably some people out there like, oh, he's back. Now he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver on a team that doesn't have any other receivers. But it's just not worth it to me personally. But there's going to be people that are convinced that he'll have a good season. So if you could find somebody like that and flip him for some mid-round value, I think that's a pretty good move. Sell Gronk at tight end. I've been advocating for this, and I do admit I've been wrong about his start to the season, but I just do not think that he's going to replicate multiple touchdown games as the season goes along. He's going to eventually have a dud game where he has 1 catch. I just trust me. I would try to sell Gronk for if you get Darren Waller or George Kittle, who both had some mediocre games. Definitely do that. It's not even a question, in my opinion. Defenses to sell high. Sell the Chicago Bears because they're good, coming off a good week 1, but they've got some pretty difficult matchups throughout the season. And I think that going up against Cleveland, I don't think it's going to necessarily be as great of a defensive output as you might think, per se. So try to see if you can flip the Bears for a more consistent defense coming off a great week 2. And then sell all your kickers if you can. If somebody wants to trade you a flex for Graham Gano, I would definitely do that. Waiver wire pickups. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of these waiver guys because we got a little more of a picture on some of these players. So QBs, Justin Fields is pretty self-explanatory. You have to pick him up on waivers if he's available. He's got a lot of opportunity to step up in a Bears team that has mostly been very pedestrian so far this season. Justin Fields didn't look great in week 1, but I do foresee the potential for a Deshaun Watson-esque breakout similar to in 2017 when he went off coming in for I don't even remember who that quarterback was. I think it was I have to go back and look. But it was somebody who was very, it might have been Brock Osweiler or something like that. But basically, the Texans had mediocre quarterbacks for years, and then Deshaun Watson went in and changed everything. I kind of foresee something similar potentially with the Bears. It's very similar game script or scenario, and they've got some weapons there as well that Fields might be able to take advantage of. Other guys to consider, Big Ben got a good matchup against the Bengals. He could have a bounce back for some surprisingly poor output against the Raiders. Daniel Jones has got a great matchup coming up against Atlanta. I would definitely consider that as well, especially with his rushing floor that he shows. He's a very good stream option. Trick for this week, but I do really like him for week 4 is Taylor Heinicke. Taylor Heinicke's got the Bills this week. I don't think that he's a great stream option for week 3, but I really like him for week 4 against the Falcons. I think he's got potential to put up a good game there. And I think he's a good stream option to consider from time to time as well. Running back. So I talked Kenneth Gainwell already, and I was debating Gainwell or Mitchell as more long-term value, and I think especially after week 2, I feel more strongly in the camp of Gainwell because Gainwell is performing at the level of Miles Sanders, and he's getting this almost similar involvement as Miles Sanders as well. Gainwell is explosive. He's definitely a guy that if anything happens to Sanders, he becomes a RB2 with great upside. I really like Gainwell. If he's still available, you should definitely grab him if he's there. I think that would be great value for you to have. Another guy to consider is Jeff Wilson Jr. for San Francisco. Again, I don't really like San Francisco's running back core. There's just too many different guys they could throw in there, and they're always getting hurt, it seems. But Jeff Wilson Jr. is a guy who's been in the system, has been productive before. He's a good player to have on your bench if you can afford him in an IR spot or something. But he's more of a guy that I would have and then try to flip him for value because people are hyping up Jeff Wilson now because of this injury situation. Like, oh, he's going to be the guy that fixes it. But they've said this about Trey Sermon. They've said this about Elijah Mitchell. It's just probably not going to happen. On a side note, though, if I would own any of these 49ers backs, I would still go with Sermon because I think that he's got the most potential to break this mess that's currently going on over there. Other players to keep in mind as well that are great handcuff options. I like owning handcuffs in case anything happens to these running backs. Chubba Hubbard for the Panthers. Alexander Mattison for the Vikings. Tony Jones Jr. Saints, and then Demetric Felton for the Browns. So these are all guys that are good stash players, and then they also give you good trade value if you have to the Christian McCaffrey owner, you trade Chubba Hubbard. It gives them insurance in case anything happens to him. Tricks on waivers. Sony Michel, especially going up against Tampa Bay in week 3, which is one of the best run defenses in the league. I just don't see potential for him to break out at all. I would stay away from him. And then David Johnson. So the Texans got their own little roulette of running backs going on now where everybody thought Mark Ingram was going to be the guy. And then now David Johnson's scored the most points in week 2. And I think it's just going to be another thing where it rotates between the two of them and Phillip Lindsay. And personally, I would just stay away from all of it. Wide receivers. KJ Osborne. So a guy I talked about him a little bit in yesterday's video too, stepping up into a role where he is getting involvement and has played pretty well so far this season. So we take a look at his stats. KJ Osborne, he's got some questions to me because Minnesota is you got Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson there, but over the last 2 games, he had 7 receptions, 76 yards game 1, 9 targets, and then week 2, 5 receptions, 91 yards, and a touchdown on 6 targets. So he's getting involvement, and he's putting up pretty good numbers. So he's a good guy to consider rostering as well. I don't know if I'd feel comfortable starting him yet, but he's definitely a guy to keep an eye on with this team. Other players to consider as well. Will Fuller is a guy who he's probably rostered, but he's getting dropped by a lot of people right now because Miami people like Jalen Waddle more. Will Fuller's got the suspension, how it's their quarterback situation, etc. But Will Fuller, very good receiver last year, and Miami needs a guy to step up. He's a good guy to consider if he's out there. And then other players, Darius Slayton dropped the touchdown in Thursday Night Football, but he's going to have a great matchup against Atlanta, much same thing as Golladay. Other players to keep in mind that are good PPR floor players if you need somebody to just throw in to give you some safe plays. Braxton Berrios for the Jets, Adam Humphries for the Washington Football Team, and Hunter Renfrow for the Raiders. All very good PPR options to consider with safe value that are all widely available. Tricks out there. Quez Watkins had over 100 receiving yards, but that was off of 2 catches. And it's just not like, you don't ever want to chase stats like that because it's not replicable game to game. Freddie Swain, very much the similar situation. He's a guy that he's definitely out there, but I think that I would much rather avoid somebody like him. Tight ends. So Max Williams, best game from week 2 of the mostly available tight ends. I like Jack Doyle the most, though, because I think Jack Doyle, he's a good check down option for Jacob Eason if he plays, or Carson Wentz if he plays, because Carson Wentz already prefers tight ends anyway. And then they've got Tennessee, which is a good matchup for week 3. Max Williams, I think, is a good guy to consider, but I also can see a situation where, again, he's going to have some games where he scores, but he's going to be up and down just depending on the game script. So I'm not super high on Max Williams, but he is somebody that I'm definitely keeping an eye on. Other players as well, Pat Freiermuth, really kind of taking the reins away from Eric Ebron as this go-to tight end on that team, somebody to keep an eye on. Foster Moreau had the touchdown, but this is Darren Waller's team, just avoid him on the Raiders. And then Dawson Knox, similar thing with the Bills. He's going to have some okay games time to time, but he's not generally reliable tight end. Defense to pick up. Carolina. I was surprised with the performance against the Saints. I didn't see that happening at all, but got a great matchup going against Houston and Davis Mills on Thursday night. Great defense to pick up. They're probably the number 1 defense I would consider picking up on waivers. Las Vegas is another good one as well. They've got Miami, which if they have the Jacoby Brissett experience from week 2, then it's going to be a good game for them. Tricks out there, the Giants. The Giants have Atlanta, and they very well could have some good performances against a team that looks like it's very poor, but I just don't see the defense being consistent enough to do that as in general as it is. And then similar to Tennessee, people probably chase them because they're going to be putting in Jacob Eason, but I just have a lot of questions about Tennessee's ability to defend the pass, and they've Michael Pittman, etc. Just avoid Tennessee. And then kickers. So I've talked about kickers a lot. I just want to put this out there with kickers is that the number 1 kicker that is only about 17% owned in leagues is Daniel Carlson. And Daniel Carlson has all the formula for a team that would be a great fantasy kicker. He's on an offense that is not getting a lot of touchdowns necessarily, more so getting in field position, but then struggling to get into the end zone, which makes sense because Josh Jacobs is banged up. They've got Peyton Barber as the goal line back, which is not exactly a great recipe for success. And then questionable receiving options outside of Darren Waller, so they struggled in the red zone conversion, so a lot of field goals for Daniel Carlson. So that is a big reason why he is the number 1 kicker. He was also a top 5 kicker last year, just for your reference, but a lot of people don't know that. I just want to point out, though, that the number 1 and 2 kickers drafted from ADP. And I talked about this as well in my kicker strategy video. You can check that out in the description below. Justin Tucker and Harrison Butker, respectively, are the number 12 and number 17 kickers to start the season. So it doesn't make any sense to draft a kicker. I'm going to probably continue to harp on this throughout the whole season, but if there's any proof of that, just look at the way it is right now. Drop candidates. I'm going to talk about this in a quick summary. Guys that I'm comfortable dropping at each position. Zach Wilson, 4 interceptions. Other quarterbacks out there. Got Denver next week. That's a big no. Ronald Jones. Tampa Bay's backfield is a mess. Ronald Jones has struggled. Not worth it to me. Le'Veon Bell. If they really thought Le'Veon Bell had it back again, they would have promoted him to the active roster by now. So just stay away from him. Houston running backs, I just drop all of them. I don't think they're really going to give you any consistent value whatsoever. Jacksonville wide receivers, DJ Chark I would drop. Shenault I would maybe consider holding a week, but he's getting to that point. Curtis Samuel, he's on IR anyway, and Washington has already got some other younger receivers that look to be more consistent anyway, like De'Ami Brown. Marquez Callaway, again, another drop candidate. Disappointing. I thought he could have been a breakout candidate, but just doesn't look like it's happening. Evan Ingram, he can't stay healthy. You've got other tight ends out there. Just drop Evan Ingram if you can't get on the field. Cole Kmet, again, another guy. He looked like he might have had some potential against Cincinnati, but he only had 1 point in that game. He's another guy just don't even bother with. And then defense. So Washington. So again, you're going to have some defenses that get drafted high, but Washington has got some tough games on the horizon. They've got Buffalo. Then a couple weeks from now, they got the Saints, which you don't know exactly what you're going to get with them. But then they've also got Kansas City, Green Bay, and Denver in October. I think it's if you see a defense like Carolina, I would drop Washington for them. And then that's pretty much all I got. I will talk probably some more kicker strategy stuff later on, either this week or next week. So I've got a little bit more on that. But that's all I got for buy low, sell high, waivers, and drops this week. So if you're interested, please consider commenting, or subscribing to the channel. And comment below if you want your questions answered in a video that I will make on Saturday. Comment below on your questions, and I will answer your questions and give you a shout out on the show. If you want to see how it worked last week, just check out my channel, and you'll see that I answered everybody's questions who commented. I don't have a lot of subscribers right now, so if you comment, I will most likely answer you. And I'll try to do my best to help you win your week, because that's what this is all about. It's about helping each other get to be successful in fantasy football. All right, well, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.